and I'll pray. So I'll pray us in. So let's just take a breath. Just set your intention to be present in this moment and let go of any stress or anxiety that this day has brought you. And just breathe. Wise and loving Spirit, we give thanks for this time together. We give thanks for the awareness of your ever-present love, your power, your peace, your presence in our lives in every moment. We just welcome that awareness. We open ourselves up to divine wisdom. We open our hearts and our souls to learning and growing, and we give thanks for this opportunity to listen to the urging of our souls to grow into a higher state of being, to learn and to grow and to be more that we can in this world with your support and guidance. So we say thank you, thank you, thank you, God. And so it is. Amen. Well, I want to thank you guys all for sticking with us for this whole 4 weeks. And just to remind you, if at any time you want to say something or share something that you don't want recorded, let me know and I can pause the recording. That if you want to add something or ask a question or something, raise your hand physically by waving at us. You can use the raise your hand button or just turn your mic off and say, I got a question. And we'll let you into the discussion and answer your questions the best that you can. And we look forward to your participation. And this is a tithing class. So at the end of the class, we just encourage you to tithe to your home church because there's so many different ministries here together. If you feel spiritually fed, go ahead and do that. And this is our last week. So again, thank you. Thank you so much for all of you for being here. So currently there's just myself, Reverend Don, Reverend Teresa is here from Unity of Daytona Beach, and Reverend Maggie from Unity of Central Florida, CCU Orlando, Christchurch Unity. Any one of those names fit us for a little while longer. And we're just so glad to be here. And hopefully Reverend Jim Ernston will be joining us. Reverend Tracy and Reverend Kathleen are not going to be able to make it tonight. So, you know, we've done a great job of getting through a lot of the material in this book. We've talked a lot about Charles's views on transformation in the Lenten season and how we do that, and the power of our thoughts and how we change our minds to change our worlds. And we've gone through quite a bit of his tough verbiage to try to find the meaning of what he's talking about. And tonight we're going to do chapter 6 and chapter 11. Chapter 6 is a really fun chapter for me reading it because the title is The World Calls to Courage. And Charles really talks in this chapter about man's responsibility, not only for ourselves, but really for our whole world. He throws it out there to the whole world, that he starts by saying that man's responsible for the world, not just our individual lives. And he says the poverty, the prosperity, everything that happens in the world is determined by what he calls our beholding and working, which I translate to say our thoughts and our actions. It's our thoughts and our actions that not only create our experience of the world we live in, but he's saying it actually affects the world at large and the world that other people are living in. And he starts with a restatement of his first principle. He says, there's an everlasting marching on. Doesn't that just sound like Charles? An everlasting marching on in every industry and science, which to me was just a fun way of saying that there's this one power and this one presence, this constant marching forward of bringing us all into, you know, our next phase of being in everything, in industry and science, and absolutely everything in the world, and all that we know in our knowledge. And if the world is progressing, then so are we, and so is our faith, so is our understanding, our spirituality. He says Christianity is surprisingly progressive due to continued spiritual growth and understanding and possibilities, that with everything that becomes possible when you're working with the divine, that Christianity moves forward in a progressive way. Christianity has not been called, most denominations, progressive in recent history at all. So I'm going to start with this question to our ministers tonight. You know, where do you see Christianity, or more specifically, the unity movement, being progressive today? And there's Reverend Jim. Hi, Reverend Jim. We were waiting for you. Welcome.
I think Jim should go first. Speaking of progression.
I didn't see when your screen came on, but we're talking about when Charles was talking about the world moving forward. Christianity moves forward as being progressive. Christianity isn't historically progressive, at least in recent history. So where do we see Christianity, or even more specifically, unity, being progressive?
Yeah, I'll jump in there. Absolutely progressive from the standpoint of original sin and the idea that we're not going to jump in on that idea. So for me, being able to know that I am divine by nature and not flawed in my original form just gives me such hope that that's the progressive piece that I celebrate. I celebrate that on a daily basis, I'm going to tell you, rather than saying that I have to, let me just leave it there. So abandoning the idea of original sin, I think, is the most progressive thing that we can do.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I like that.
I'll share.
Teresa?
Thank you, Jim. Yes, that's a beautiful thing. I remember the first time I heard that. What? Born in original goodness? What? It only took me 30 some odd years to, but anyway, whatever. But the other part that makes me feel as though, and to be proud and part of this movement, the unity movement, is our inclusivity and the teaching of oneness. I mean, goodness gracious, look around. I think it's, there's so much divisiveness. And gosh, if you look at some of the history of Christianity too, not a whole lot of the thoughts of oneness going on there in my way of seeing it anyway. So yes, I do believe that that's progressive, and the teachings of that, yes, we're all one and that we're all here together for our good, each and every one of us, to help one another as well, and to realize that goodness in one another. So yeah, I'm proud to be part of that.
Yeah, wonderful. Great. Thank you. Reverend Maggie?
I would say the same, what I was going to say, what Teresa said, and in our inclusivity and our diversity, but to tie in both of Reverend Jim and Teresa's answer is we're progressive in the way that we pray affirmatively. I mean, talk about progressive. We're not sitting here beseeching. We're not begging, although we can. There are moments where we're just, I referenced that parking spot when you've got 5 minutes and you got to get in and get out. It's like, please God, just let there be a parking spot up front. But we manifest a higher level of consciousness each and every time we pray from an affirmative standpoint. That is to take the action modeled by Jesus in giving thanks in advance and trusting in faith that our highest and best is already unfolding. And that keeps us in our power. We're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. It keeps us in alignment with oneness, and it keeps us in a place where we are in the original love, that there's nothing that we could ask for that would do harm to another to be given to ourselves if it was not in alignment with our highest truth. And when we know that, we are growing our level of consciousness, which implies our evolution, our progression, in being able to allow women in the pulpit to allow a place, a welcoming place for people in all expressions of the divine, whatever color, shape, size, whoever you're sleeping with, whatever clothes you put on, whatever accessories you approve of, and however you identify in the world. We assume the responsibility for ourselves to make allowance for you in your expression based on the fact that we're doing our own inner work. And that's where I see unity being on the front line of progression. And we're seeing it, we're kind of trailblazers. We're seeing it across some of our other religious arms. In Catholicism, in the Methodist community, there are changes that seem huge and big to them. And we're all like, welcome, catch up. So we are kind of on that cutting edge, and I expect that we'll continue to do so.
Jim?
And what about the idea of being able to read scripture in terms of metaphysically? Huge, and not being trapped by that literal nature of the words of something that was written thousands of years ago. So yeah, let's celebrate that as well.
Yeah, that occurred to me too, that we have this understated, and sometimes literally stated, belief that we're not done figuring this out yet. I mean, how much more progressive can you be, other than the fact that we're not done learning, that we don't have all the answers yet, that our understanding of spiritual law, of spiritual principles and how they affect the world, as Charles said, I might not have it quite right yet, and I'll change my mind, and someone else can learn more. There's generations to come who will have a higher understanding than we do, built on what we've learned and built upon and expanded and found in the world that we weren't even quite aware of yet. So just that openness to learning more and changing our minds and getting better information, more clearer understanding is extremely, for me, a progressive attitude that we're still learning. We don't have all the answers. We're not done. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm absolutely convinced that Charles got that from Buddha. The Buddha said, give it a try, and if it doesn't work, prove me wrong, kind of a thing. So Charles is very, very clear on that as well. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which also points to Charles being progressive at that time. Unity is not just,
yes.
We identify ourselves as Christian, and it is from this conglomeration of all of the major world religions. We find bits and pieces rephrased and reframed in a palatable way for a Christian mind in an American society. But to Jim's point, that's exactly what Charles was doing, is he studied the world religions. He was a fan of Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and Judaism. So it's very, you won't find that in any of the other religions necessarily, and many of our other branches of Christianity.
Yeah, think about the synthesis that he used and included Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how brave was that at the time, 100 and some odd years ago. Yeah, I give Charles and Myrtle huge credit for that act of bravery.
Exactly. Yeah. Teresa, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to add, that made me think of when you were talking there, Reverend Maggie, about one God, many paths. So many people don't believe that at all. So, different faiths. And then also, too, just the fact that we embrace our divinity, that I got all kinds of a nasty letter one Sunday left in the from a new person that thought, how could I say anything like that? So, but yeah, just those thoughts. Not even thoughts, the knowing and embracing our divinity.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and that's what Charles brings about too, is it's the need for courage to develop and to grow and to become more. That's one of the places where he says courage is really called for in this world, that we need more awareness of the divine within us. Yeah, and that takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to think that, and even consider that not only can we be more than we are more than we are, and that asks us to be more than we are. Jim.
Ron, I'm not done yet. What makes us progressive is the mystical approach as well. So, Charles goes to headquarters, right? there's no intermediary, there's no there's nothing in between. And that is a huge thing for me in my life as well, is my relationship to the divine is direct. It's not through a priesthood. It's not through anything else. It's me and my creator. And I just love that idea. Now, there are many Christian mystics, but we just embrace it so wholeheartedly that I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to say, is it only me or is everybody getting pumped up now? I'm like getting pumped up. I'm like, yeah, where's my pom-poms? Go unity.
Unity, unity,
That's
unity.
Give me a U.
Oh yeah, wonderful, great, yeah. So Charles goes on in that chapter then. Jim, are you ready to go on, or do you have any more? Okay, so he goes on to speak about, again, he comes back to the idea in this chapter again about the power that we have with our words especially. And he talks about how when we speak, we affect the cells and atoms of our very body. But then he goes on to say, also in the body of those we associate. So not only do our words affect us physically, they can actually physically affect the people around us. So, I mean, that's just amazing to me. I mean, that's a very, very powerful statement. And it occurred to me, most people don't get that at all and find that really hard to believe. And why do you think it is so hard for us to comprehend the power that we have in our words? I mean, I remember Maya Angelou one time saying that she believed words were physical, that if you said words, they actually stuck in your drapes, in your fabric, in your walls. And if you were going to use unfriendly, unhappy, negative words in her house, she would escort you to the door because she didn't like what you were leaving behind. And she says she's done that in parties, walked over and put a hat on somebody and walked into the door and said, you can't talk here anymore. Why do you think it's so hard for us to comprehend how powerful we are with our words? And what can we do to accept that power in our lives? You know, how do we get to know that and to use that in a positive way?
I think it's because once we come to the determination and the acceptance of our power, it's something we can't unknow and have to forever maintain responsibility for. And, you know, it's like teaching a teenager how to manage their money. Once we know that they can manage their money, then they don't have a reason to come back to mom and dad and say, I'm short, I ran out. So it's realizing that and then accepting the responsibility. And I know that we know because we've seen, you know, a majority of us studied this in the 4 agreements. And, you know, our words have the ability to create, and they also have the ability to destroy. And I am certain that I am not alone in this virtual room. And for those watching later who have destroyed someone, just ripped them one side up, one side and down the other. And it was finally coming to the acceptance, the willingness to accept my action as something that I would just never do again. Mm-hmm. And that means that I have to take responsibility for who? Me.
Yep.
No one else can make me not say something that I cannot take back. And it's not an apology type thing. It's relationshipal. There are people that exit lives because there has been damage done. And the regret is far, far worse to carry than we'll do Lent next year and we'll all release regret. But it's far worse to carry than having to look ourselves in the mirror and reconcile with our own emotional and pain body. Because, you know, to Don's point with Maya Angelou, is Brene Brown is an Atlas of the Heart is a hot topic right now. And she says that It is proven scientific fact that pain and our feelings hurt and register the exact same way with the exact same intensity in our brain as physical pain. And if we won't come through and just like gut punch somebody, then we have got to learn how to take care of ourselves so that we don't do something and unleash a verbal gut punch.
Very true. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. And I think that, of course, like just to add on to what you were saying there and how we have treated ourselves on top of all that, what have we told ourselves about ourselves? And then you were asking that question, Don, and all I could think about was, why do you think we do that? And listen, don't you wish we all just came out of the womb and somebody was just sitting there going, you've been born in original goodness and you are just, and they might do that. Was it you that was telling us that? One other class, Maggie, I think you're saying, and all of that stuff starts to stop. We know who we are. We come in, we know who we are. And then we get in our families of origins and, whatever we've agreed to and all that sort of thing. But at about 18 months, a lot of that starts to fade away, as it were. So, we have a lot of that undoing too, I believe, that gets in the way of us knowing exactly who we are and how power filled we are, and I'd like to tell you that now I'm past all that. And that's not true. And it happens less and less. And, and you get back to truth and back into alignment faster. But, like we've talked before in one of these classes, all that old stuff in there, it's got its nice little pathway and it's pretty comfortable in there at times, and I have to do my own work and some days pull out every spiritual tool I have to get back on track. But I really appreciate having the opportunity to take this in once again, just about how these words, of course, I think by and large, many of us want to speak with, loving, gentle kindness all the time, but taking it at a deeper level of realizing the true impact that it has. And I mean, by my way of thinking, friends, we got work to do, don't we? Look around out there, So thank you, God, we're on this path together.
Yeah, absolutely. Reverend Jim?
Yeah. So the power of words, I guess I kind of gravitate to how quantum, let me put it this way, how quantum physics has caught up with us in terms of theology, so that now we understand that vibrational quality of our words actually working with the physical nature of the universe. So those thoughts held in mind, the vibrational quality of our words and the emotion that we put behind those words is physics now, is what we understand as physics. So when I was in my 20s, I kind of dismissed a lot of this as Pollyannish or, there's those positive thinking people, you just think positive thoughts and it's going to happen. Until I really understood that vibrational quality, that co-creative piece of physics. So yeah, that's where I've landed lately.
Very good.
I think it was, I'm sorry, just heard, not just heard, but read relatively recently when Reverend Ellen Davenport referred it to us, think of ourselves as tuning forks, out there, whipping out all that vibration stuff.
It's also so much. It's so much that, to point back to Hebrew scriptures, and I believe it was, keep me honest, Jim, I believe it was Moses that asked to see the face of God.
Yeah.
And essentially God was like, boy, you can't handle this. If I showed you all this, you wouldn't know what to do. It would disorient your cells in a way that you would no longer be functional and recognizable. So it makes perfect sense. So he passed behind him and showed him his shadow. You know, that's all we can almost in our human capacity stand to absorb. And I've talked a lot about this recently at CCU, is the process of assimilation. We wake up and then we go, holy Moses, no pun intended, but look at me, I'm that. And I have this power, and I'm divine, and I can create and I can destroy. And when we recognize in each increment, we just need a moment to assimilate, to recognize and fully absorb the level of our power. And I do believe the older I get, that it's never stopping. And it is just, it's a painfully, arduously slow process at times on our human timeline to get to the place where we fully accept our power. And because we're in the Lenten process, and Easter and resurrection is at the point when we really fully recognize that, we ascend. Then we have no use for this vehicle any longer, and we return from which we once came. So it's just a lot of power. I think that's where we hesitate to embrace it in big gulps. It's just not humanly possible for us.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and I'm going to go outside the lines here again. You mentioned create, destroy. That's right out of the Bhagavad Gita. That's Vishnu. That's Shiva. That's that creative power. That's the destructive power to start again, as well. So there's truth. The truth is out there in so many different flavors and sizes and shapes that that if you just have your eyes open, you'll see it.
Yeah, that's funny that you brought up the Bhagavad Gita. I was just thinking that when she was saying the same thing, or
Yeah,
when,
yeah.
actually when Teresa was saying it, because they were talking, or Maggie was talking about, Moses couldn't handle it. Well, that's what Krishna does with Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. He shows him his whole divine self,
Yes,
and it about blows Arjuna's mind. He can't even describe what he sees, and
absolutely.
on about how unbelievable it was. So yeah, it's just the truth is out there, and the Bhagavad Gita is what, 6,000 years old, and then the story of Moses is about 4,000 years old. So, it's just
But
unbelievable. The truth's out there.
yeah, the truth's out there, and even with Moses, you could see Moses' progression even. So he sees the shadow of God, right? And then the next time I think a few chapters on, then it's the burning bush, right? So it's like, well, you saw my shadow. How about a little bit closer? I'll show myself as the burning bush. So there's even progression there.
Yeah, exactly. Very good. All right. Yeah, very good. Yeah, courage to use the power in our lives. So where do you see the need for courage for us now in our spiritual journey in this common day and age? And anybody can throw in on this one too. I mean, on anything, but if anybody else has anything to add, where do you see the need for courage on your spiritual journey today? Jim?
Taking responsibility.
Yeah.
What a huge thing, right? 25 years ago when I first went to a Unity church, the guy that I was drinking coffee with after the service, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And he says, Unity is one of the hardest Christian churches you're going to ever attend. I was like, what? What are you talking about? He says, we teach responsibility. You have nobody to blame. And I didn't quite know what he was talking about. It took me a couple of years to figure out what he was talking about. But yeah, there's an amount of personal responsibility that we teach, and a lot of people aren't up for it.
Yeah, very much, very, very much so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I step outside the walls of our churches or the computer screens of our churches, for some of us these days, there's courage and opportunities to be courageous everywhere. I think about the Columbine shooting. I mean, that was way long ago. And the question that one of the shooters asked those kids is, do you believe in God? And the teenagers saying yes with a gun in their face to say yes. And we, luckily, not many of us will find ourselves in a situation where our lives are at stake, but our social standing, our circle of family and friends and place of origin or belonging, that's real root chakra stuff. We have the opportunity to be courageous in facing our beliefs and using our power to voice them regardless of the consequence. If we believe what we are teaching, preaching, and sitting in the pews for each Sunday is that it's unfolding for our highest and best. So courage in facing consequences of what will fall away, which is what is for me and for a lot of people I've been speaking with in our community, Reverend Don, and in my inner circle, is what's so hard about the Lenten season is that you start to wake up and recognize what's going to fall away according to your standard or your status and your evolution, individually speaking. So I think there's courage for that. And I think there's courage for acceptance, for those in the class, and Teresa too, Reverend Don, Reverend Jim, and I had a class in school where we were to step outside one of our implicit biases and approach somebody and have a conversation. And I remember the day that I found the courage, standing in line at 7-Eleven, buying a Big Gulp, and asked a construction worker of color wearing a MAGA hat if I could buy his soda and have 5 minutes conversation with him. And he gladly did. And it took me to another place of acceptance, making room. If we are unity, then we must learn to make room for all levels of worldviews, perspectives, and morals. That is extremely courageous in my book.
Yeah. What occurred to me when you were talking about courage and faith and courage around our beliefs, what occurred to me is how much courage it takes for me to put words to what I don't believe in, especially with my family and friends and people I've known for a long time, to say what I no longer believe in, what I was taught or learned as a child or growing up or was raised in, my culture and religion of origin is I don't believe all of that anymore. I don't believe everything that I was taught as a child, and I don't believe some of the things that were taught to me in my religion classes and by the church and stuff. So to be courageous enough to have those conversations, to actually be honest enough to say, not only is this what I believe in, but this is what I don't believe in. I think sometimes it takes as much courage to say, I don't believe in that anymore, as it does to say what I do believe in.
Yeah, I agree. Great
Yeah.
point.
Good point, Don. Thank you. And I'm just going to echo all that too, because I could see myself evolving, whereas particularly in some of my family members who come from a much more traditional religious viewpoint than I do, even though we all grew up together, but nonetheless where our paths have gone. And so what I did in the beginning is I just didn't say anything. I don't know if it was this class or someplace else, that it took me a while before I even bothered to tell my brother I was in ministerial school. But then also just when you're there gathering and they're having some conversation about, some of the harder topics, and I just didn't participate. And my evolution is that now my courage is not only just to speak my truth, but the other courage is that I don't need to change anybody's mind. They don't have to agree with me. I don't have to agree with them, but we can still love one another and still behold our Christ essence as well, you know? And it's not like I have to change anybody's mind, but really it's all about me standing in my own truth. That's where the courage comes, you know, and let others be them, you know?
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you. Rebecca, do you want to add something?
Reverend Jim has heard this already. When I was down in Arizona in March visiting my sister and her husband, the very first day I was there, they were hosting a Bible study group from their church. And I had attended their church before on other visits, and I was very well aware of their strong belief. And they teach the Bible verbatim, letter for letter, word for word. This is the word of God, and this is the way it is. So I asked if I could sit in with the group. And Larry, my brother-in-law, was the facilitator of it. And he told me what the topic was. It was the book of Romans, first chapter. And it had been a while since I'd read Romans. So my sister gave me a book so I could cram before the class and be familiar with it. And specifically, they were going to deal with some of the verses. And it was on the wrath of God. Okay. And they had questions. And like, what was the person's understanding of what the wrath of God is? And then we were going to discuss 5 of the wraths of God. And before the class, I told Larry, I said, Larry, okay, you said there's 5 wraths of God. You know, do you want to give me a hint here? And so he started, you know, talking about it, and I'm just listening and saying, oh, baby, Becky, you're going to have to sit on your hands and, you know, zip your lip here tonight for an hour and a half. And I was very respectful. You know, I listened to their dialogue and what they had to say. And as they were talking, they were using some words and phrases that I'd never heard before. So I'm taking notes. And at the end of the class, I posed some questions, and they posed questions to me like, was I a born again Christian and things like that. And I really had the courage to respond to them respectfully from where they were coming from, and still let them know what I know to be true about my relationship with the divine, with God, and everything else. And yeah, it got a little dicey at times, but it was that courage to respond respectfully.
Mm-hmm.
And the conversation of this whole thing didn't end that night. The next day, I did have another further conversation with my brother-in-law, and just to let him know that I very much appreciated what he had to do. He's studied the Bible. He's gone to classes for years and years and years and years on this, and his diligence and the way he did the class and everything, I gave him kudos for everything. But yeah, he still had issues with me and my understanding or my interpretation of what they were doing.
Right.
He just couldn't go there. But it took everything within me. And the nice thing about it is we were just starting the book that week. And so I'd read those first few chapters, and everything was like, oh yeah. Yes. This is it. This is what it's all about. This is why I'm here. This is why I'm staying. And this is how it is. You know, the unity principles, the unity understanding of oneness and source. It's like, I like that a lot better than what I was listening to that night.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing that story with us. I appreciate that. Jim?
So I do have another story as well for somebody within my family, and for me this maybe illustrates some empathy that we could have, or that we could have, for those that are not on the same path that we are, or that those that don't have the same courage, maybe. I'm not exactly sure. I'm going to have to sit with this. But this is my cousin who is gay and is not accepted by the church of our youth. And yet he refuses to leave the church. He stays there even knowing that he's not accepted. And I asked him, why don't you leave? Why don't you find something that's more accepting? And his theology, he's so embedded in that belief that he can't. And we've got to respect that as well. We've got to have empathy for those folks as well. People are at different spaces, different places.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Yeah, Myra?
I have a question on the in this chapter, starting with the last paragraph on page 23. I'd appreciate it if y'all would talk a little bit about. I'll read it here, and then if you all could help me with this, because I read it and I went, man, is this really happening currently in our world today? It says, where in Jesus' teaching shall we find a formula to offset, to dissolve, to meet and nullify the atomic bomb? Okay, you know where I'm going with this, with what's currently happening in the Ukraine right now. We find it, he said, in the 10th chapter of Luke and in the 22nd chapter of Matthew, and it's the two great commandments. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. This is the great and first commandment. Jesus told the lawyer who asked him what was the great. This is the full fulfillment. Then he writes, the formula has been tested and history shows that it has built and sustained civilization and produced peace, happiness, and prosperity. Let us all join in prayer to this end, that we may take the formulas that Jesus gave us as working principles, that they may be sent out to the world through the power of the word. I'd like you to talk, if you would, I invite you to help me broaden. Earlier at the beginning, you all talked about the power of our speech, our words, to build up or to tear down. And he spoke about it right into the energy that would impact somebody physically. And you talked about the chemistry. Well, talk a little bit about what he's saying here, because this, I am struggling with, aren't we just repeating the same things over and over? And the one thing, I'm new to this unity, but the one thing that stands out that is very progressive, there's many things that y'all have talked about tonight, but it is your overwhelming commitment that collectively, through the power of prayer, you can be changing what's happening in our world. That, I don't know how to ask it any better than that, because I'm new at it with the unity experience. But I would really love a little bit of your feedback regarding that. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And actually, I appreciate that question, Myra, because my final question for this chapter was exactly on that passage, because he ends the passage, Charles ends the chapter with the greatest commandment, to love God with your whole heart and love your neighbors yourself. And my question to the group was to be, why does Charles use this quote to end the chapter on courage? So I think we can answer my question and your question at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I want to, I'll address the history repeating itself, because, and it's later in another chapter, and I did speak briefly on this in the Sunday lesson, where what we can see with our human eye is very, very limited. And so it is tempting to think that we are seeing history repeating itself, but not exactly. We're learning in very small increments, which points back to the assimilation. Every explosion or explosive confrontation, World War, Civil War, civil rights movement, women's suffrage, gay rights movement. I mean, all of those things, they're big collisions of beliefs, which is an outproduct of the inner evolutionary activity of what we are changing in our thoughts. So while we will undoubtedly see another war, it will not be exactly like Ukraine and Russia. Something will have changed. We know we do the best we can with what we have. And as we move through the conflict, we develop the capacity to know better. And when we come to the other side of that, we know better, therefore we do better. But that's not to say our work is just done. It's to continue to do the inner work, to continue, which is the prayer that we're talking on, to love God with all our being. If we sub God for self, love ourselves with all our being, and paying attention to the ways in which we are evolving upward in our consciousness, that is to know that we're going to see this change, but it's going to be incremental, and it starts within ourselves. So to love God is to love ourselves. And when we, Martha Creek will say, where two or more are gathered, there will be bristling. So when I've evolved or changed my thinking or my knowing of God, my worldviews, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. And others that we encounter in our circle have, like Jim's cousin, have not and will not. We collide. And in the collision becomes the shift. So I don't want to think that collision is the reality or the catalyst of our change, but isn't it? I mean, whether it's an outpictured war, or if it's the wrath of God lives right here between these four inches between my ears. And when all hell breaks loose, it comes down from here upon me. And when I can't deal with that, I don't have the responsibility, the emotional and spiritual maturity and capacity to know where to put that, how to process that. Hurt people. So I won't take it in. I'll go outward. And because immaturity dictates, I mean, think about fifth graders. I don't like Susie. So I'm not going to just go tell Susie I don't like her. I'm going to get everyone in the schoolyard to come with me to go tell Susie that we don't like her, right? It's just happening. And in that perspective, I can just sit back and go, like, poor Putin. Like, how miserable of a being, how much wrath has this man have experienced between the 4 inches between his two ears to have outpictured this tragedy and taken his internal wrath out into an entire country and on the world stage at this point. That's my perspective.
Yes, I agree. And thank you, Myra, for sharing and asking the questions. And I think it's just pretty much everything that you were saying, Maggie, I agree with, of course, but it reminds me of just, we're traveling this path, and some of us are awakened, if you will, and we're still awakening, not saying we've reached it, but some of us have awakened. And we're not just anchored in what we want to call sense consciousness, or Charles refers to in here all the time, the carnal mind, that's not where we are placing our focus. Now, don't we wish we could just run around and pop the buttons and have everybody wake up? Okay, wake up now. That would be a wonderful thing. And I think that we are on a path, and I agree with you, Maggie. And at times it can seem ever so slow. And that people think that the materiality is all that there is. And so to me, it made perfect sense to take that scripture and that commandment of to love one another. Because when we can, like what Maggie was saying there, when I can know myself as the expression of God that I am, and I can know you all as the expression of God that you are. So love God, love ourselves, love our neighbor as ourselves. There is no need for all this nastiness that's happening in the world. But we are called upon to be the light of the world, let our light shine, so that we do illuminate the path. That's what I believe, and at times it can seem disheartening, that I got to get all refocused one more time, goodness. Let's talk about the crucifixion. People weren't woke up then, now were they? Some yes, some no. So it is an evolution. And sometimes it feels like we're going forward, and sometimes it can feel like we're going back. But it's true. We can't be the same. We're not even the same as we were yesterday, right? I'm going to call that good news. But at times it can feel very slow. And it can seem like we're going backwards or just doing repeat performances.
Thank you. That I am so sorry, but I've got to say, between what the two of you have shared, I just had a aha about a new way of thinking in terms of resurrection. The collision is that crucifixion, but there's a new life, a newness that comes out. Wow. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And I think to build on what they were saying about people at different stages, to me, I see like an allegory of like your spiritual growth as going through schooling. And eventually, if you can get through middle school and high school and college and then masters and be an awakened, illuminated being, that's the goal. And it may take lifetimes to do that, for your soul to do that. But if you're in high school or the college level of your spiritual growth, that means there's a whole lot of people that might still be in middle school, and the bullies are on the playground. And it's not that they're repeating the same thing you did. They're just being the bullies on the playground in their level of spiritual advancement. And for me, the courage that Charles says with love one another as yourself is, it takes real courage to love them through that while they're being the bully in the bully stage. And especially if they're bullying you or the conflict, I mean, that's the hardest thing. It takes the most courage, is to love someone through being in conflict with them when their conflict is aimed at you. When someone's coming at you and you have to love them through what they're going through, and you're actually the victim of their actions. To me, that's a huge amount of courage. That's loving someone as yourself to the nth degree, that you're going to love them through their growing experience and you're the victim of it. That's the ultimate for me of a courageous love. Yeah.
Part of the model is that Jesus laid before us too is living and let live. To go piggyback there with Dawn is, Jesus was hanging out with the hookers and the tax collectors and the lepers and all the places that thou shalt not go and commune with, and turning the other cheek when we are a victim of criticism or critique or bullying or chastising or whatnot. That's a hard one. And I didn't learn it, and sometimes I still have to remind myself that I learned that. because the younger, the middle-aged one wants to be like Scrappy Doo, like, come on, come on. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot, I've already done that. I don't care what you think. And I'm going to hold space for your development to rise up. I'm going to anchor in here and wait for you to reach my level and not slip back down to meet you in a lower vibration, in a lower level of consciousness. It's tough.
Yes, and I think that just speaks to, you know, Jesus being able to see beyond, you know, seeing through the spiritual eyes, you know, at such a high level. You know, what do we always say, and what I always read or heard in school, you know, most highly spiritualized man. So always seeing beyond, knowing that there's something else than just that physical behavior or whatever they're demonstrating right there, but being able to see past that. That's the high spiritual work, I think, is to know that, okay, these people might be in your face doing whatever, but there's still something greater within them. You know, how do we see that Christ in them, even when they look so unacceptable to us, or what their behavior is, you know, and still not allowing ourselves, and still being able to stand there and honor ourselves as well, and still have that ability to look past, you know, then what? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do, you know.
Danielle put a comment in the chat that says we can look toward the courage of those staying in Ukraine as a light, positive evolution. And you're absolutely right. And isn't there, speaking of conflict, isn't there always those that stay, that are like, we're under attack, we're gonna die here, but we are staying, by golly, help is coming, we're gonna stay for the cause of evolution. They may not know that it's evolution, but they're staying for the cause of this, whatever this is, will not happen again. A flavor, a version may, but this exact thing will not happen again, not on my watch. And I'm a good old Texas girl, so I think of the Alamo, that last stand, man. They were surrounded on all sides. And haven't we all felt that in our conflict and our evolution? Like the family system is rocking so heavily to just drag us back down to their place of comfort. They were surrounded in the Alamo. They were fully being under attack. There was no way out. They had no supplies, and yet they stayed. And then Sam Houston rode in, you know, and Texas is not part of Mexico anymore, you know? So it's like, but that happens. And that's what's expressing in Ukraine. That's what happened in World War II. It's what happened in the Revolutionary War. It just keeps happening. And we have people in this room, I know, because I know them, who stayed, because not on my watch, by golly. There will be equal rights. There will be. And that's part of our calling. That's part of what I spoke on Sunday, is who have we come here to be in the process?
Great, thank you. Thank you. Jim, do you want to add?
There may be, it's kind of a strange concept that isn't comfortable necessarily, but the idea of celebrating discomfort, in fact, because that is where the growth happens. And if there wasn't that discomfort, you know, well, we know that there is no stagnation. You're either moving forward or you're moving backward. But that discomfort is almost a signal that there is going to be movement, or there is movement. There will be growth through this process. So yeah, when I live with a very wise person, and she reminds me when I'm in that dark place, you know, here's your opportunity. Here's your opportunity. Where are you going to grow? And I love her for it too.
Oh, Lisa.
You got to be grateful.
How did you know who I was talking about?
I'm going to have her call me and remind me of that at times when I'm like, no, I don't want to grow.
Isn't she a good one? Yeah.
She is. Yes, she is. For sure. All right. Any other thoughts on that before we move we've got a little bit of time left. I want to jump to chapter 11. Okay. Chapter 11 is spiritualizing the intellect. And in this chapter, Charles talks about how this Christ mind that we have within us functions in our consciousness in two states, the body and the mind. And he tries to explain how those two need to, haven't in the past, need to grow into working together. And he says that first we disentangle our thoughts from the flesh and lift them up to spirit, which is the first step that we need to do. And for us to grow spiritually and have our mind to go up, it needs to step away from our flesh self. Because in the evolution, the natural body would naturally come first, and then the spiritual mind begins to unfold and move forward out of it. And which sounds like one is better than the other. But then he brings us the story of Jacob and Esau, which is the story of the soul's evolution, where he says Jacob, which is intellectual mind, has been in control, that the mind has been in control, but the body, who is Esau, finally comes into his own and becomes a power in the world. So it's this separateness of one being above the other, but then the other one coming back up in their power and equalizing. And so let's just start off with, what is Charles trying to say with this story? Let's put this in a little framework. Who wants to give us a little overview of what you think he's trying to do with this story? Because he kind of goes back and forth.
All right, Jim. Yay, Jim. Yay, Jim.
Well, you may be disappointed because this pointed to something for me in terms of disentangling my thoughts. We're holding a world peace project here in Minnesota, and we incorporate a whole lot of mindful meditation. Mindful meditation, as taught by those folks out in Redwood City, California, that is the term they use. Disentangle your thoughts. And it struck me to read this here with Charles, and then to read it in terms of the mechanism that we use in order to reach the silence within ourselves and create peace within our lives. There were too many coincidences for me. I'm hearing this disentangle, and I'm hearing peace, and I'm hearing the idea of world peace and the silence, and all these things kind of come together for me. So I know I'm not answering what the heck is Charles teaching here, but yeah, there's something there, obviously.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I think Charles is pointing to this story as what's to be expected as being biological creatures. So the body comes first and the mind is a part of it. And through just the physiological maturation process, we go through the formation of our brain until we are in our mid-20s. And consequently, that's about the time we all start to wake up. We start to question. Maybe you're ahead of the curve, and maybe you didn't question until you were in your mid-30s. But somewhere in the process, the brain fully forms, and we develop the capacity to start to observe the observer. Meaning that we can disentangle and raise up and begin to question our own thought patterns, our own beliefs, our own values, and how that ties into God, of course, religion or the lack thereof in our upbringings, so that we recognize that while we are in the same carriage, we have the ability to maintain, to grab hold of dominion of the mind. And the mind is, by then, it's quite a tangled web. Let's just let's give it early onset of waking up and call it 25. So you've had a quarter of a century of wonderful stuff and garbage, and undoubtedly you've witnessed or been victim of some sort of abuse or neglect or violence, or I mean, even if you just watched Bambi, you've been traumatized. And those things we have to start to pull apart and make sense of. And sometimes it's a very arduous and process that causes great turmoil. And to be able to do so, even for just a stretch of 15 minutes in meditation, or even just a stretch of 90 seconds at a red light, is quite an accomplishment for some of us some days. So I think that what he's saying is to expect this. And in Charles's own way, just in a cheerleader kind of way, saying, and you can. It feels like you're this one unit, but you're two parts of a whole. And don't forget that.
Okay, good.
I'll just piggyback on that. And I think I love that part at the end that you just shared there, Maggie, because I think that's true. That's kind of what I took away from it as well, is that those disentangled thoughts, I thought, we don't have to go to battle with our parts, so yes, indeed, we want the illumined intellect, so to speak, to be our guide, but we also have to allow space for that maturity and that evolution, that everything that we've been talking about, and tap into that consciousness, even though we have this body going on with us as well. So I think it's for us to work together in harmony, is the way I got to see that there. And so I just made my own note that was always talks about, that ego to be in service to our soul.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Yeah, he goes on to talk about how the illumined intellect rules, which is kind of exactly what you guys were saying. And then he adds, but we have to also bless not only the body, but everything connected with it. That's on page 82. He is talking about, a lot of times in Unity, we hear this talk where, the intellect or the mind or our spiritual selves, the illumined mind, is superior, and the world of the flesh, is less than, or is something to be moved away from. There's a lot of talk in Unity about leaving the worldly desires and being, spiritual. So it's kind of confusing, because now we're having him saying, okay, the intellect rules, but you have to bless the body and everything that goes with it, because I think what you've just said is they work in tandem, that the actual physical realm isn't necessarily less than. It can be a distraction, but it needs to be lifted up along with you, along with your spiritual mind. And the mind doesn't necessarily need to be in a place of superiority. It's a partnership that works together. So I think you've kind of answered my next question already. So let's move on a little bit further in the chapter, where Charles talks about how Jacob awakens to the truth that God is everywhere and omnipresent, when he talks about him leaving his homeland and realizing that God is in the actual rocks and in the dust and in the dirt, and he builds a little temple out of rocks to God, because God is absolutely everywhere. And if God's everywhere, wherever he is, he needs to be working with God. So he makes a covenant with him. Charles says, when man begins to see beneath the surface and realize that God is functioning with him constantly, he seeks to make a union with infinite mind, omnipresent God mind. So that's what Jacob does. He makes a covenant with God and promises a tenth of all he receives to give back to God, which Charles says, this is the beginning of tithing. This is where he sees it starting. And I find that interesting. I didn't see that coming in this chapter. And all of a sudden, we've got a lesson on tithing. but he says something that really struck me on page 85, and that's what I kind of want to get to and talk to you about this, because we all know about tithing. We all have been in unity, and we all understand the practice. But he says on page 85, give of your substance with the thought that it's God's money you're handling. And I've actually done a Sunday talk about this is God, act appropriately with God in every aspect of our lives. But give of your substance with the thought that it's God's money that you're handling. So I want to talk about that a little bit. How does this statement, to think about what you have as God's money that you're dispersing, how does it reframe how you think about tithing? And how can this perspective shift our attitudes on giving? That what we're actually giving is already God's, basically. And anybody can jump in on this, because I'd love to hear some other people's opinions on what does it do about your opinions or your feelings around tithing if you look at what you're giving as God's money. Jim.
I believe that we're all one within this universe. So for me, it's not necessarily that it's God's money, but that the giving and the receiving is the same. So we are we are just so integral to this universe that what may seem like giving is really receiving. So I don't necessarily use the word tithe or God. I don't tie that, but just the idea that we're so like, you can't take it with you, right? So this money, these things that we have in this worldly, in this physical realm, they don't matter that much, honestly. It's the divinity that we get in touch with. It's the reconnection that's important, and part of that lesson is the giving and the receiving. So that's probably not very unity, but that's me. That's me.
It's I love that, because it just, sparked a little thought in my head about how, if we are all connected, if you give something away, you've actually received it.
Right?
You
Right?
can't
Yeah.
give away something that's connected to you. And again, I always get visuals. So my visual would be like, this wave hits you in the ocean and you take a tenth of it and dump it back in the ocean. You're still in the ocean.
Right. Right.
What have you really lost? What have you really given away? Because you're still surrounded by the ocean, even though this wave that hit you, now 90% of it might be smacking up against you, whatever. But yeah. And what Danielle's saying now, perhaps it wasn't ours to begin with. I think that's exactly what Charles is saying. It's not yours to begin with. It all came from God. So returning a tenth back to him, and what Jim is saying is it's still yours. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Through the connection. Yeah. I love that. I love that. Any other thoughts?
I'll just share that, I don't know where I heard it from originally, but I heard Martha Creek saying it not too awful long ago, just saying that giving and receiving is one transaction, which is just echoing what we all just said there. And I think that the thing that I wrote on my paper underneath of that is source of all that is. So if we believe in the source of all that is, then it goes to what Danielle just said, maybe it wasn't ours, not mine, Teresa's money anyway. It is the source of all of that is, what did they say? Oh, shoot, one second. God is source, many channels through which that source comes to us all the time, but nonetheless, it's the one source where it originates. So whose is it really? You know what I mean? But it also made me think too, if I'm not in lack consciousness, I'm not going to have any issues with all this stuff. If I know and know that, what did he say? Peace, prosperity, life, everything is already ours. And we claim that and know that and live from that place of, our Christ consciousness, then we're not going to have trouble with all of this,
Very true.
Not saying that you don't get reminded all the time, I've had places in my life where I went, uh-oh, what's happening there with that bank account now? And that was before I actually got into unity, but thankfully I had a wise woman on my path with me at that point, said, don't you stop tithing, keep tithing.
Mhm.
Because I said, oh yeah, I had that thought, oh, if I don't tithe, I'll be okay. Oh, really? You might
Yep.
want to rethink that one.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Maggie, did you want to add something?
I love this. I love Jacob as a character, and probably because I can identify with the wrestling with God to come to the conclusion and the acceptance that God is in everything. So nothing to add on, but I want just to back the train up into how we get to that in unity is we have to grapple. We don't have to, but we do. And we will wrestle over and over and over to come to the place where we have an understanding of universal law that we call God, which is principle. And how many times have we gone to the edge of the cliff and wanted to just duke it out? And this, my way, no, you're gonna give me a new name. I understand you better now. Now give me a new name. Damn it, I said. And then we get an understanding and we get exhausted. I mean, this went on, this battle between them for days. Finally, it was like, oh, there's no beating you because I am you. So it goes to tithing with there is no need to be in lack. There is nothing that is mine that was not given and provided by the universal source. Therefore, I need to be in process with, in flow with the universal energy by participating. And we participate sometimes by tithing our time. I don't have any time. I'm a senior minister of a large community. I don't have any time ever, but I find it and then I get it. And sometimes, Teresa, God bless you, what's going on with this bank account? And then you found unity. Hello, I'm this going on with this bank account. And then I became a minister and I'm like, so it's the practice of and the grappling with that allow us over and over and over. And back to Myra's question, the same battle moves us in incremental fractions at times to recognize we aren't separate from, we don't have less than we ever need. All is always well. Why? Because God is in everything and is everything, and we are a part of it. And that surrender request comes up, provoked by the ego, over and over again. How long we battle at the cliff's edge is up to us, and hopefully diminishes over time. That's all I would add to it.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Jim.
So as a visual for me, as an aside for me, because Jacob says, surely God is in this place, right? And then he stacked a couple stones, right? And poured consecrated oil on it or whatever he did. I love that idea. And it's become kind of a cool thing for hikers to do. You see the 3 stones or the stones stacked on each other. And I simply use that as surely God is in this place, It's just kind of a mnemonic for me. And I love it because I see that image everywhere. And it's a good reminder.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Thoughts? All right. All right. Well, I don't want to leave without giving anybody the opportunity if they've got any lingering questions or whatever. That's the end of my questions for our little panel tonight. And if no one else has anything else they want to say or add, I just want to thank you all for being here and remind you, if you want to tithe on this class, to tithe to your home church, because there's many different ministries here and represented. So just tithe the way that you normally tithe to your home church, whether it's online or in the mail or next time you're in the sanctuary, and let them know that you appreciated and grew from our little experience here these 4 weeks. So thank you so much for being here, all of you. Like I said, I will record put the recording up and I'll send it to each one of the ministers for last week and this week. As soon as I can get those downloaded, I'll try to do that tomorrow or the next day so that you'll have all those, and then they'll have all 4 weeks in case anybody missed one or wanted to go back and revisit something. Anybody else have any final closing thoughts? Anything else that we need to do before we pray out?
I just wanted to say thank you, Don. Thank you for getting this together. Thank you for hosting and for all those over at, wait a minute, what am I going to call you right now? University of Central Florida. I wanted to say CCU. That just flows right off of there.
That works.
But for the graphics and everything that you provided with us that made it so easy. And thank you, Reverend Maggie, too. You guys have always been wonderful to get all this on board for us. So we thank you for that.
Oh, thank you for participating. Rebecca.
I just want to say an overall thank you so much for Reverend Teresa, Reverend Maggie, of course, Reverend Jim, and the 2 other ministers, Kathy and Tracy, who weren't here tonight. Listening to your comments, listening to your little mini lessons for me. I know Myra is probably relating the same way I am. I'm still learning so much about unity, and you've just blessed me with so much new inspiration and information that I know is going to be helpful for me when people ask me about, what's unity all about? What do you really believe? And again, getting your permission to step out in courage in those situations. So thank you. Thank you for your inspirational responses.
Well, you are so welcome. We appreciate your kind words. Thank you.
I'll have to add to that also as a newbie to Unity. This is just really awesome. I mean, to have so many wise people and so many thoughtful people just put it out there, the vulnerability, the dynamics, the creativity. It's just awesome. Thank you all so much for being willing to do this.
And thank you for sticking with us, guys, because it's a hard book. We only scratched the surface on what's in this book. So feel free to dive into it more and keep reading and just keep looking back for bigger and greater insights all the time. And
yeah, we're going to do a Dr. Seuss next, aren't we?
we're going to definitely bring the difficulty level way down.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I appreciate it. I'm with you.
Episcopalian. I think Dr. Seuss was Episcopalian. Green eggs and ham had to do with the Lenten breakfast. And
oh, okay.
Because the grill hadn't been used for a year.
I like it. I like it.
I love it. I love it. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I have so enjoyed this. Does someone want to pray us out and we'll be done? And if I don't see any of you, have a wonderful, wonderful, blessed, happy Easter. Somebody want to pray us out?
I'll be happy to.
All right.
So I'll invite you to take a deep breath and find your center, to touch the place of the living, loving spirit within, through which we move and have our being and all of our unique divine expression. Allow for the wave of appreciation to come across your body and demonstrate in a smile for the divine perfection that each one of you are. Charles Fillmore pointed out over and over again how each expression is critical and our experience as divine and human beings. And so I have deep gratitude for this class, for the opportunity to dive deeper, to release those things no longer serving us, to find the courage upon the altars of our hearts and our love, our divine wisdom and expression of the newness of who we have become and who we are becoming each day through each breath. Through voluntary courage, I applaud this group. I applaud these teachers. I applaud Charles Fillmore for bringing truth onto page for us to learn from centuries after he's gone. And I am excited and affirm that we are being born again in this truth, in this light. And we take that forward into our families, into our communities. And we have and set the great expectation of changing the world beyond. For our participation in that truth and that knowing, I say, thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen.
Amen.
Yeah, so it is.
All right.
Thank you, Don. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Happy Easter.
Awesome,
Happy
everyone.
Easter.
Teresa.
Thank you
Bye,
all.
everybody.
Happy
Thank
Easter.
you.
Dear Rebecca Marie.